Welcome back, guys. We have an amazing guest, Rachel Wilson. By virtue of our good friend Will, he introduced us, and I'll tell you, I listened to two of her podcasts today, and as a believer, she's connecting dots for us in a profoundly awesome way. So strap in and get ready. I know this is going to open up some doors of interest and hopefully clear up some of the confusion with regard to the history. And the history always, as we know, is so important. That's what leads us to point B. We have to know what's in between in order to reconcile and find solutions today. And we need to see this train of consequences that led us here. And Rachel's amazing. So without further wait, Rachel's written a book. You want to tell us a little bit about the book?
Yeah, sure. It's this little book right here. It's called Occult Feminism: The Secret History of Women's Liberation. And when I wrote this book, I wasn't sure if anybody except maybe my dad and my kids would ever read it, but it has wildly surpassed my expectations, and it's done really well for its little self. So I'm very proud of it. But it's basically just a book that kind of corrects the history about feminism and how it came to be the dominant social narrative that it is today. Because the common understanding of it that most people believe is actually not the case whatsoever. And I'm sure we'll get into how that happened and why that happened and all of that. But that's basically what the book is.
Very, very good. And for our believing friends, our brothers and sisters out there, you are Orthodox Christian,
Yes.
correct? Okay. Were you
hmm
brought up that way, or did you
No,
find that
no.
later in life?
Yeah, I was raised like Dutch Reformed. Um, and it's kind of a funny story how I came to Orthodoxy, but when right before the pandemic stuff happened, I was in a good, decent, like what I would consider to be a pretty solid, like conservative style Bible church, right? And I had started going to like the theology stuff that they were doing on Sunday nights for the people who wanted to really get into the nerdy weeds of theology. Cause I mean, I don't know if you can see my
Heck
glasses,
yeah.
but yes, so I was really interested in that, and I thought I need, I've been Christian my whole life. I need to get into like the weeds of the theology. And I just had a lot of questions that the pastor at this church really couldn't answer for me. And there was some holes and things that were not making sense, which I felt like it made it hard for me to evangelize
Yeah.
because, if atheists or, anybody who doesn't agree with you can ask a really good question that you can't answer, it's like, "Mm." So I prayed about it a lot and I was asking God to kind of help me figure this out. And then all the churches shut down. And so it was like, "Ah, what do we do? What do we do now that they're all closed down?" And so I remember praying a lot and asking God, how do I worship you properly with my church closed and with all this weird uncertainty? Like, just please lead me and guide me to what we should be doing. And within a couple of days of that, I had a friend reach out to me and be like, "Hey, I know you pretty well. You should check out this Jay Dyer guy. He's an apologist for this Orthodox." And I had
Mhm.
never heard of Orthodoxy. So I was like, "Huh, what's that?" And I look into it and I read about church history just a little bit and I find out, whoa, I don't know anything. Like, I don't know anything because, in Protestant theology, you start kind of at the Reformation. It's just Catholic Church bad and then the Reformation. Yay. And then everything you find out is kind of after that for the most part, I think, for a lot of us. So that's kind of how I got there. But I have a
Very
lot of
cool.
love for my Protestant friends because, that was 40 years of my life. So I get it.
Oh yeah, yeah. We have a strong love. We grew up sort of Italian Catholic, and it was one of those things as you become a Protestant, because we're Protestants now, but we were getting into the church fathers probably about 9 months ago, my brother and I,
Yeah.
and it because we're fascinated in the same way you are. We found ourselves getting into the weeds, evangelizing, and matter of fact, our Bible study kind of started with those deeper looks and takes at theology, and it's really one of the most fulfilling things you can do. And if you
Yeah.
go to a Protestant church, I think if you're interested in that, I'm not saying you won't find it, but I think like some of the things I respect deeply about the Orthodox is they fast. They have some of these
Yeah.
more traditional ways of serving and being served when you go to church with some of the harder stuff. So that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Now in the church, speaking of the church, um, we have a huge problem with this blindness to feminism, and people hear the word and they're like, oh, they have this false preconception of what it is that's been, sort of like you said, beaten into them
Hmm.
throughout their lives. So you can't blame them, but they're
Right.
also sort of what's built in is also a defense mechanism as well. And so they
Yes.
kind of want to stay guarded when this conversation comes up. And that's in the church. So if you could speak on that, like how you discovered feminism in the church, and also what they need to hear. How do you communicate with these people in the church? And you're so good at giving examples that are sort of almost too apparent. It's like we look past them. So if you
Yeah.
could give us some of those, it'd be great.
Yeah, sure. So I'll kind of start with like a little bit of why there seems to be like an agreement, right? If you did a man on the street, if you guys took a microphone and you went out in public and you just did a man on the street and said, "Hello, sir or ma'am, what do you think provoked this feminist movement to start? Like why do you guys think first wave feminism happened?" And generally what you'll get is, "Oh, well, first wave feminism was good, right? Because it was just equal rights for women. Women were very oppressed. They didn't have any rights. They were practically slaves, chained to a stove in the kitchen, forced to give birth until, they died either in childbirth or of hearth death or something. And they couldn't get divorces and they just were beaten all the time by drunken husbands. And so the natural, this it was just a movement that's time had come and women had to rise up. They looked around and they said, "Oh no, we are oppressed and we can't stand for this. So we will march and we will go on hunger strikes and we will picket the White House until we get equal rights." And that was a good thing because now all the women have equal rights. And then most people, especially Christians, will kind of say, "But I think, maybe it's gone a little far. Maybe these last couple waves were not as good and maybe they took things too far. But I think first wave was good and it made women into real human beings with rights." Now, that is not the actual history. That's not the truth. But if you're looking at this, watching this podcast, going, "How did they find this one random lady, like in the Midwest, who knows the truth about it? And I'm supposed to believe her?" Like, like
Right.
all of the universities tell me, and, my history classes and everything in the pop culture, everything I've ever heard tells me one thing. Why should I believe this lady? Well, the reason that I would like you to at least investigate what I'm talking about is because the history was actually gate kept and kind of stolen,
Mm.
starting in 1970 with the advent of women's studies as an academic discipline. Now, this is something that was actually created and paid for by the Rockefeller Foundation and the Ford Foundation. And
Shocker.
yeah, I know. If you know anything about that, you'll know that they had their hand in a lot of social engineering, and this is certainly no different. And what happened when they created women's studies as a discipline in universities in 1970 is that they found a particular little group of feminists who were extreme radical Marxists. Sandra Harding was kind of the chief architect of this, along with a couple of other ladies, and she created something called standpoint theory. Now,
Mm.
standpoint theory is the reason why we all have this like common understanding of what we think feminism is and how I can explain that it's not actually true. So, standpoint theory posits that there's no such thing as a historical timeline that's objective. There is no such thing as objective truth or anything like that. It depends on the standpoint of the person examining the history. And in her theory, which comes out of Marxism, and she's very straightforward about that, that she's a Marxist theorist, very radical one at that, not just like a mainline one, but like a really, really radical Marxist feminist. She says that the most oppressed person, so if we're doing our oppression Olympics and our intersectional, oppression Olympics, it would be something like a person of color who is also, LGBT or something, who is in the lower economic rungs of society. They're going to have the best standpoint from which to examine history because they have the most like levels of oppression going on, and therefore they have more standpoints from which to gauge the history. I know that sounds a little weird and a little convoluted, but it actually became the accepted way of doing empiricism in the historical study of feminism. Wild that nobody ever talks about this. Crazy that we don't really know that this is how they did things. But what that amounts to is that the women's studies departments, they actually have the physical records. So if you're looking for like the Margaret Sanger papers or Elizabeth Cady Stanton or Susan B. Anthony's papers and a lot of those historical records, they're actually held in the women's studies departments in universities. And these are the places that write the curriculums. These are the places that, write the PhD papers and everything that the like historical narrative is based on. And they did that using standpoint theory. So what you're getting is not like what you and I might consider something of an objective timeline of events or anything like that. It is a literal rewrite of the history from the standpoint of an oppressed woman. So it would have been a woman who during, maybe the suffrage era was a suffragette. You would never get, and what we don't get is the standpoint of the women who were against it.
Yeah.
Now here's where stuff gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Most people do not know that the vast majority of women around the time of suffrage campaigns were against women's suffrage. They were against women's liberation. They were against feminism.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Can you
Sure,
give
yeah.
a very, very brief definition of suffrage to our listeners who may
Yeah.
not know what it is?
Yeah, sure. So suffrage just means voting rights. And people also have a misconception that all men always had the right to vote. That since we had any form of democracy or representative republic, that all men immediately got suffrage. They all had the right to vote, which is completely untrue. It was very limited. And the vast majority of men, whether you're talking about England, Australia, the United States, Canada, did not have equal voting rights from the start. There were a lot of restrictions depending on where you were. So like in England, for example, men only got universal suffrage about 10 years before women did, which is something that almost nobody knows.
Wow.
It's there in the historical record. You can look it up and find this information, but that's not what you always hear in the mainstream. Same thing in the United States. It was a gradual process where really most men couldn't vote until after the Civil War. Even then, a lot of, people who didn't own land or they might have been recent immigrants or things like that, those men couldn't vote either. So really women's voting rights came along with a lot of other groups getting voting rights. So
very, very good. So
Yeah,
tell us
yeah.
about the other side, the anti-suffrage.
Yeah,
The
so
ones we don't hear about.
this is one of the things I'm trying to do with my work is revive this part of history because there's actually a ton of it there in the record that people don't know about. So they did a couple of referendums early on around the turn of the century to kind of gauge like how interested are women in this, because like most kind of revolutions, this started as a very fringe thing with a very small group of very radicalized women who wanted like no fault divorce and women's voting rights, and they wanted a lot of social change, like a lot of progressive kind of Marxist social change. So they did a few referendums early on in various states to gauge how interested people, and especially women, were in suffrage. So the biggest one we have the most record of was in Massachusetts, and I believe of the women that actually came out to vote in the referendum, only about 4% actually wanted women's suffrage. And because this was so unpopular, there were several other states that had referendums as well that were at least that bad, if not worse. The women's suffrage associations themselves, so Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony and their groups, they actually blocked women from voting any further in referendums on whether or not they wanted to vote. Yes, you heard me correctly. The women who wanted women's suffrage didn't want to let women vote on whether or not they wanted suffrage. They were like, we don't care if you want it. We're going to shove it down your throat anyway.
And you can Google that, guys. If you can Google that survey or that referendum results, and it's right. Like Google's not suppressing it. You can find it. And no one knows about it.
And to play devil's advocate, like, do you think some of these feminists would say, well, they didn't want to vote, or
It's
That
Stockholm
suffrage
syndrome.
were afraid,
Yeah.
because their
They were
husbands were so
scared of
abusive
freedom.
and
They had always
yeah.
been slaves, so they were scared of freedom and that sort of thing. Or they were not educated enough and things like that. So what I've kind of done in the last several years is I'm the nerd who does your homework for you. So nobody, even the women's studies like PhD candidates, really don't want to go back and read the writings of feminists from the 19th or 18th centuries because it's long, it's kind of boring, it's archaic language. But I did that for you guys because I love you and I want you to know the truth. So I
We
went back
appreciate
and
you.
I went back and read like Susan B. Anthony's History of Women's Suffrage, which is huge. It's like a 4-volume tome that she wrote to detail her own legacy in the women's liberation movement. And right in the first chapter, she says, there's this misconception that women didn't want suffrage because they were uneducated and didn't understand it, or that they were scared of freedom, or things like that. And she said that's really not what my biggest obstacle was. My biggest obstacle was that women were doing so great. They were very happy and they had almost everything they want. In fact, women were very privileged under male suffrage, and they didn't want to lose those privileges. So I had to convince them that the privileges were worth losing for them to have this, equality with men. For instance,
Man up.
I know a lot of people don't know that women actually had higher literacy rates than men did, going back to the very beginning of this country when we started keeping track of that in 1790. Women had higher literacy rates than men. They graduated high school more often than men. They weren't allowed in every field of higher academia, but neither were most men. Most men were not just allowed to, like, it wasn't like now where all you got to do to get into college is knock on the door. It was supposed to be a thing for like the top 5% of people who were very intellectually gifted and going into certain fields, right? So this idea that women were like barred from being educated, completely false. If anything, it's the opposite, because men had to do a lot of farm labor, factory labor, things like that, and it was seen as kind of like a waste to send them to college when they should be laboring and doing trades and things like that. And women, prior to public school, were the educators. So it was seen as very important for women to be literate and have like good knowledge of arts and history and different things. So yeah, Susan B. Anthony herself said, my biggest hurdle was that women were very comfortable. They loved that they had like all this privilege in society, that they
How
had a
would you
lot of rights men
define
didn't have.
how would you define, like, or how does she define this privilege? Because I'm sure these women pushing back and be like, well, what privileges? Like, what?
Right. Right. So, in the book, I have a bunch of the old anti-suffrage like posters printed in there, so you can see them, and I detail some of the arguments there. Some of the privileges, like in New York State, for example, it varies by state, especially because back at this time period, the states ran more like their own countries. We weren't as federalized as we are now. So, like in New York, for example, if a rich woman came into a marriage with a lot of wealth, say she's marrying like a middle class man, but she comes from an upper class family and she stands to inherit a lot of wealth and property, the man is not entitled to any of her um, resources that she has coming into the marriage, and the men were held completely responsible for the bills, for the debts of the household once they're married. So this is a common thing I'll get where women say, well, we weren't allowed to have bank accounts and we weren't allowed to have credit cards until the 1960s or 70s. That's true, but do you know why? They never tell you why. The reason why is because it was seen as like a social, it was like there was a social stigma attached to holding women responsible for supporting the family. So they didn't give women credit cards or bank accounts because the man was legally liable for her debt. So say she went to a department store in 1902 and bought a whole new wardrobe that was tailored and everything else, like women often did back then. The man was held responsible for that debt, not the woman. So actually she could often get lines of credit in her husband's name. She could spend, she could own property, she could have wealth coming into the marriage, but no matter what she had, the man was still held responsible. So if for whatever reason that didn't get paid, you couldn't put a woman in debtor's prison and you couldn't hold her legally responsible. It would be the man, even if he, you know, lost his job or came from a poor family, it didn't matter. So
That's crazy.
yeah,
Wow.
there's a lot of things like that that add context that they intentionally wrote out of the history. And there's a great paper that I reference quite often. I think a couple of my Substack pieces reference this. Another history professor named Joe C. Miller, he did a review of women's history texts from the beginning of the 20th century to now. And he found that over time, they actually wrote this stuff out of the history. They removed the fact that there were these anti-suffrage groups that had much higher membership, far more interest, and a lot more money and funding than the pro-suffrage groups. They wrote out the fact that there were debates between women who were against suffrage and women who were pro-suffrage, and that the public, you know, sentiment was not so much in favor of women's suffrage because of those debates and things like that. That there were a lot of women actually leading the charge against it, and they had very, very compelling reasons in my view for not wanting suffrage. And maybe we can get into a couple of
So
those.
you're kind of describing something you and forgive me because I don't remember the exact term, but it is a ploy that people in power will use where they submit a problem, they create a problem, and then they sell you the solution. I know you know the academic
Yes,
term for that.
that's called the Hegelian dialectic.
Okay, the
You
Hegelian
didn't know
dialect.
that? Come on.
Didn't know it. You went to more school than I did.
I didn't. That's the thing. I just have a high school diploma and a cosmetology license. I'm just nerdy.
You went to the
I'm
right schools. You went and got your own books and you read them. That's right.
Well, I'm just a curious person and I read a lot. And I was always in like advanced classes, but by the time I got through high school, the thought of going to university, I had such a bad time in public school that I was like, nah, I'm good. And I had my first daughter at 20 and I wanted to be with her. I wanted to stay home with her.
That
So
is awesome. That Prussian education system just isn't cut out
right.
for everybody, is
No,
it?
it ain't.
That's right. Everybody
Gotta
has to go
educate
get
yourself.
this book here, School World Order by John Klizek, tells you all about the founding of that Prussian public school system and who came up with it and why.
Yeah.
But
So
yeah,
that
they
Hegelian, so basically we're understanding that here we have a ploy. We have this mechanism people have used many, many times because you said just a minute ago that they didn't have all the power. They didn't have all the support. They didn't even have all the money. And
right.
yet somehow they overcame. And so that's the question is how and how did they actually get the minds of women when they weren't really supported? It's wild.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the good question, right? Like this lady's telling me that the history isn't what I've been told. So how did we end up here? If nobody wanted this, how did we get it, right? Well, we're talking about the era that suffrage is being debated is the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, right around this Victorian era when we're coming out of the Industrial Revolution and we've got the first big like titans of industry, the Carnegies, the Rockefellers, the Vanderbilts, these nouveau riche families of the golden age that were some of the wealthiest and most powerful in the world. And we'd never really seen this before because you'd never had like a democratic republic with these like titans of industry making incredible money for the time period and having like incredible influence over politics and being able to kind of buy off some senators and congressmen, and then they start their philanthropic foundations because they're doing philanthropy because they love you and they just want a nice society for you to live in. So they start these mega, multi-million-dollar philanthropy foundations that became the social engineering hubs of the 20th century and completely molded the society that we live in now. So what happened is suffrage was very unpopular. But coming out of the Civil War, a lot of the feminist activists kind of hitched their wagon to people who were anti-slavery or, trying to liberate slaves and things like that. They kind of tried to like attach themselves to that movement, which a lot of those people didn't like. They were like, oh, it's kind of a separate thing, ladies. Like it's not really the same. But they kind of succeeded in doing that to a point. And in the book, I have a whole chapter on this, on how the Gilded Age millionaires kind of why they wanted feminism, why they liked it, why they picked up on a few of these people and kind of pushed them to the forefront and kind of funded the whole thing. So I don't know if you want me to get into that a little
definitely.
bit.
How did the dollar bills play into this sucker? I think that's great. Let's get into that. That's ultimately the way it is, right? Dollar bill.
Probably the main character in the play of how this happened is a woman. Her name is Alva Vanderbilt Belmont. Sorry, it's a mouthful. And if you're wondering why she has so many last names, it's because she was the first woman to successfully marry money and then get divorced like multiple times and walk away with a lot of the money from her ex-husband. So she first married Cornelius Vanderbilt's grandson. He was a notorious philanderer and was off, like rich men often do, in Europe, having affairs and things like that. And so she was able to attain a divorce at a time when that was pretty rare and pretty hard to do, and got half of his fortune. After that, she married his best friend, who she was presumably already having an affair with before the divorce, because it happened really quickly. His name was Oliver Hazard Perry Belmont, and the Belmont family were the bankers bankers for the Rothschilds. So very prestigious, very wealthy, very influential family there. And then he died shortly after the wedding. So she was one of the most wealthy women on planet Earth at the time. She ended up with this huge, and like the amount of estates, like these Gilded Age mansions that you see, she owned many of those, and she had all this money. And so now that she's in her twilight years and she's single and she's got all this money, she really fell in with the suffrage crowd and really liked what they were doing. And she almost single-handedly really got it going. There were other actors who did, and I cover that in the book, but she's like the main person, because what she would do is, a lot of these feminist activists were terrorists. They would bomb places, they would light fires, they would do various acts of terrorism, they would break storefront windows, things like that. Especially like the Pankhurst family in England, you'll read a lot about them doing terrorist activity to try to force the issue of suffrage. So she would bail them out. Anytime they got arrested for doing these kind of terrorist activities, she'd bail them out of jail. She bought them their headquarters. She funded the publication of a bunch of different magazines and pamphlets that they would circulate everywhere. Basically propaganda, right? Propaganda machine that she funded. And then Cornelius Vanderbilt also, he was involved with the Woodhull sisters, who were abolitionists and first wave suffragists. Also, snake oil salesmen, con artists, and total like gangster women, basically. They were wanted in several states for selling fake cancer cures. They conned people out of money all the time by being spirit mediums and fortune tellers and tarot card readers. And what they did was they helped Cornelius Vanderbilt game the stock market during its first crash in the late 1800s. He came out on top. Everybody else lost their behind, and he came out on top to the tune of tens of millions of dollars. And the press asked him, they said, I think they could kind of tell something was up. They were like, how did you have such foresight to know exactly what to sell and when to sell it to make all this money? It's really interesting that you're the only person that came out of it like this. And he said to the papers, do as I do, consult the spirits. Yeah. So he said these women told his fortune, but what really happened is they had their own prostitution ring that they ran. Yeah. Lovely ladies. They ran a prostitution ring in New York where they had spies who were sleeping with a lot of the high-level Wall Street guys, and they got insider trading tips and gave it to him. So he, in turn, for their help with the espionage, funded their first women's magazine, which was the first publication to publish the Communist Manifesto in the United States.
Wow.
So you can see when I tell you this side of the history why the women's studies departments in the 70s didn't want to teach this to the nice suburban girls whose parents were paying for them to be educated at these nice universities, right? They didn't want to say, oh yeah, the heroes of our movement are con artists and they sell fake cancer cures and they do insider trading and they're communists and they're fortune
back then
tellers.
Communist was like a very bad word.
Oh yeah. Definitely, especially, you know, we're coming out of the Red Scare in World War II. Nobody wanted that association, so they were very cryptic about that part of the history and never really told it. So when you hear these women spoken about in the mainstream, they're always just talked about like they're heroes, like they're these wonderful heroes, and they're often portrayed as Christian, which
Wow.
is the thing that I wanted Christian women to know, because most of these women not only weren't Christian, despite whatever labels they wanted to use, but they often made a living as automatic writers. So they would claim that like spirits came to them and told them to write this book or this speech or this, you know, whatever they wrote. Or they would be spirit mediums, fortune tellers, tarot card readers, all that kind of stuff. They were involved in like theosophy and various forms of occult magic and things like that. There's a professor I reference in my book from Sweden who himself is a Luciferian, and he wrote his PhD thesis, which is a book you can buy on Amazon. It's called Satanic Feminism, and he details this same history and indeed says what I say, which is that these women in the suffrage era that were at the forefront of the movement, they openly declared Lucifer as their liberator.
That's
So
fascinating.
yeah, one of the
Yeah.
most mind-blowing things would probably be if everybody knew about the Woman's Bible. We'll have to talk about the Woman's
Yeah,
Bible.
can we I wanna wrap that up because
Yeah,
there's 2
sure.
points you said before we go into the, because that's my Joe and I's most interesting part is what we're kinda
Yeah.
going into now, which is the occult connections. I find that just absolutely awesome. But to wrap up the desire for these high rolling guys, they're kinda taking these black sheep women, right? And
Yes.
they're influencing the culture that way to the point so that they can open up a giant workflow from all these women,
Yeah.
right? Isn't that what they want to do? So they want
Yes.
to liberate the women, and then all these women are now available for the workplace, and then the men no longer can, what you said, household income, or you know, what did you call it, family income. They no longer,
Yeah.
janitor can't make a family now because you have all these women in here. And so that was the as far as I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, that was the goal in achieving
Yes.
women's liberation. Like Joe said, the dollars, how do they make the dollars? By limiting the effective the value of a man in the workplace has now been chopped in half.
Yeah, yeah.
So they make more
I'm
money now.
glad you brought me back to that. Thank you for doing that, because yes, at this time, so in Russia they had the revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917. And one of the very first things that the Bolshevik government did, they appointed a woman, a feminist. Her name was Alexandra Kollontai, and they made her one of the highest ranking cabinet members in their government. She was the commissar for social welfare, and she said, we need to completely get rid of the family unit. It's archaic, it's old fashioned. And the reason they wanted to get rid of it specifically as Marxist revolutionaries was the everything is passed down through the father. We got to get rid of this idea of the father and the nuclear family, because private property is passed down through the father, the man being the breadwinner and the purchaser of land, and the person who leaves a legacy to his children. If we can get rid of that, we can take all of the, you know, property and wealth and resources and put it in the hands of the state. So we've got to get rid of this patriarchy, which the word patriarchy simply means nothing more than rule by the father. That's all it means. It means that the father is the head of the home and of the nation and of the church. And she said the first thing we got to do is get rid of that. We need women to see themselves as units of labor, and not as mothers of their own children. Yes, you should produce new human beings to be new units of labor for the state, but those children don't belong to you. They should be raised communally by the state for the purpose of serving the state. So, what the Bolsheviks did, they replaced God. Russia was an Orthodox Christian nation at the time. They made it illegal. They repossessed all the churches by force using violence, and made atheism and worship of the state the religion. So when this is going on in 1917, the Communist International, a lot of the really influential Europeans in Germany, France, and England wanted to bring all of that here. And these wealthy industrialists were all in these circles with these intellectuals. And they thought this was a really good idea for all these huge factories that are just being built. We need lots of cheap labor. We need a much bigger labor pool, and they couldn't import enough people through immigration. It's actually a problem we're dealing with right now. So they said, what we need to do is get women out of the home and into the workforce. And if we do that, not only these are the same people, okay, the same people that funded suffrage were the same small group of people that were at the Jekyll Island Club in 1913 who created the legislation that created the Federal Reserve banking system and the income tax. So those people said, well, now we've got this income tax, we've got this Federal Reserve banking system. If we can get women out of the home and into the workforce, we can tax not one, but two incomes. And we will have not only one person that we can get into debt, but we'll have two people we can get into debt. And there was a third benefit there, which is if both parents are working all day, what do we do with the children? Right. So around the exact same time, they create the compulsory public education system. So all the children go off to school during the day where the government can indoctrinate them. And of course, these private foundations that we're talking about also created public school curriculum, helped fund the Department of Education. So it was basically a giant social engineering project to break up the nuclear family and make everybody do everything they do day to day on behalf of the state and corporations.
And the sick part is it all comes off as them doing favors for each other, for the people. That's the sickest part. Is it's like,
we're supposed to believe they just care. They just really want women to be able to vote. We just think women should be able to have political opinions. We care so much about women's political opinions, right?
Yeah.
Was a lot of this, like, it seems like the feminist movement kind of is a worldwide thing around the same time. Did Europe go through this kind of at the same time?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the first book covers kind of the history of the West. So England, Canada, United States, and Australia all kind of followed the same timeline, and all of those feminists were talking to each other. They met with each other. They had letters back and forth. They did speeches, events. They had, all kinds of conventions and things like that together. There was a little bit of a separate thing going on in the East, which my next book is about, and it's taken 2 years of research, and it's a behemoth. It's really big because there's actually a lot to this as well. So that woman I was just telling you about in Russia, Eastern Europe, Russia, Central Asia, all kind of along the same timeline, but in a very different way, funded by the same people. So if you guys don't know, the Bolshevik Revolution was actually mostly funded by Wall Street banks, which sounds weird, right? It sounds like, why would capitalist bankers want a communist state? Well, it's because we're talking about that Hegelian dialectic again. They don't care how they get to their end goal, whether it's capitalism, communism, a fusion of the two, whatever it is. They kind of had the same goals, and they just knew that the social engineering seemed to be, they kind of backed several players in the USSR, and the Bolsheviks came out on top. So they went with that. They tried Marxism. We all kind of know how that went, but it was basically the same kind of people just trying a different method of getting the same result there. They tried the liberal version of it here and the more Marxist version of it there, which then later in the mid 20th century, they kind of used various propaganda machines to kind of try to fuse the two. So it gets a little complicated, and that's why this book is taking a long time, but I think it's super important. So I'll be
because as
very
Americans,
excited
like especially in the dating community, there's these guys who be like, oh, get a Russian bride, or some lady out of a third world country that still has some of these fundamental ideas of patriarchy, what have you.
Right.
So that is fascinating. We were talking about that earlier, and kind of trying to jump into that occult vein again.
Yeah.
You brought up, the world, Satan has been attempting to use this as a way to undermine God's plan from the very beginning, as we see with Adam and Eve. And this has been a play in his book for that's what he started with, man.
Yes.
So looking at the
other, like Adam and Eve.
Yeah, Adam and Eve, right? Exactly, with the fruit. Exactly. So I remember 2 goddesses you brought up just to kind of allow people to see that it didn't just start in the 60s.
Right.
You brought us all the way back to, like the 1700s, to let people know how liberated women truly were, with a lot of these facts they were reading. They were very highly content, had a lot of freedoms, on and on. But going back, we see this demonic cult, you described as a death cult, like with Kali,
Yeah.
Lilith. Some of these things they're ancient. Can you talk
Yeah.
on that and how
Yeah.
and connect that to the sort of founding mothers of this feminist revolution, how they were using that stuff? And
Yeah, for sure. So the book starts all the way back in ancient times, pre-Christian times. I mean, uh, going back to when most of the world was pagan, right? You had the nation of Israel, which at the time we'd say that that's the Christian church, prior to the incarnation. That's a little in the weeds, but prior to Christianity dominating most of Europe and the West and a lot of parts of the world, most cultures were pagan. And so feminism and goddess worship kind of comes out of pagan religions. And the Bible tells us that the gods of the nations are demons. So the pagan gods, from the perspective of the Bible, are considered demons. All of these entities that they would worship, whether they're Roman gods, Norse gods, Egyptian, Hermetic gods, take your pick. They always had like a god and goddess culture, right? They always had temple worship, usually with temple prostitutes. So there was sacred prostitution in all of these systems, still is. In fact, I just wrote my very first academic paper with citations and everything.
congrats. Awesome.
Yeah, that just went up on my Substack if you guys want to check that out. About this, we're actually experiencing a huge revival of witchcraft and
Yes,
paganism
we
now.
are. Yeah, you talked about Wicca being the fastest growing faith in the UK or something. I
Yes.
mean, we talked to our good friend David Gornowski about the paganism that's resurging. It doesn't have the same features that you would
Right.
expect on the surface. The aesthetic has changed, but the core elements inside the mechanism
Yes.
is the exact same.
Yep.
So and we do appreciate those. I mean, for a lot of our believers on this channel, they're updated at that point. Like these gods
Yeah.
from antiquity were demons. Like they were
Yes.
real. They had power. They had agendas. They told their people to do certain things, and they're still
Yes.
here. And they're still
Yes.
and that's kind of how you could tell that they're still at work, because the agendas they're pushing are still the same stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, when I wrote this book and I started in ancient times, I go through the medieval period, I go through recent history, the last 300 years especially. People are like, how can this agenda span all of history? And it's because it's the same demonic spirits behind it all the way through, right? Like you said, starting in the garden, it was the very first revolution was the tempting of the woman and her succumbing to the temptation because Adam was not there, and he was there, but he didn't intervene, he didn't stop her, and then when she ate the fruit, he kind of simped and ate the fruit too, right? So it's kind of
Adam
how we end
first
up here. But yeah, so it goes all the way back to ancient goddess worship, temple prostitution, and this goddess idea. Christianity comes along, and Christianity does not have these elements. Now we have Mary, we have the Mother of God, but she is not worshiped as a deity. She is a human. There is no goddess worship element in Christianity. Christianity is a patriarchal religion. We have God the Father, we have Christ the Son, we have the Holy Spirit. None of them are referred to as female. And it's a patriarchal order. Adam was made first, Eve was made from him. And I do talk about Lilith in the book because Lilith emerges as a myth in ancient times as Adam's first wife made from the earth, like him, and not from his side. Now, we as Christians don't necessarily, we believe that she is a demonic entity, but not that she was made by God as a first, mate for Adam. But we do believe that she is a demonic entity, and a lot of Kabbalistic and pagan religions worship her as such, and she's like this vengeful goddess spirit that R words men in their sleep and kills infants. So she's
Wow.
lovely. All of them have these characteristics. If you look at goddess worship, and that's why I go over several from different traditions, like Inanna, who's probably the oldest spirit, and then Kali and Lilith, and several others, they all have the same elements. They all use their sexual power to dominate men and to manipulate men. They all tend to be they symbolize birth and death at the same time, so even though they are capable of bringing life into the world, they often kill infants. Make of that what you will.
Mhm.
And they tend to want the blood of men as sacrifice and things of that nature. So this vengeful, rebellious female spirit's been there from the beginning, and this is part of the curse that is put on Eve, which is that you will, have to be subject to your husband and you won't want to be.
Mhm.
So I feel like we all have a little bit of that rebellious spirit trying to tug at us and trying to pull us in that direction. Um, and I want Christian women to know that there is nothing feminist about Christianity. There's no element of feminism in there. We are not called to that at all. And we can
Good.
get into that, but that's
That
where
that's and
the ancient pagan and occult stuff
yeah,
starts.
and so I just wanna point out sort of the obvious is, she just got done explaining the character of this Vanderbilt lady, Susan B. Anthony, the woman in Russia, Margaret Sanger. Is it not just obvious that that's exactly what they're acting out? You know,
Yes.
they have this exact representation of these spirits upon them, and their actions are just like hitting every single bullet of what those
Yes.
spirits do. And that's why they're influenced by it, why they were very attracted to the tarot cards, gaining influence through mediums, using their sexuality to the prostitution rings to get information from men.
Yep.
This whole entire playbook that they got was given to them. They were
Yeah.
given this. It's a satanic offense on the family. And so I just wanted to point that out because that's extraordinarily salient when you hear these ancient things that have been around forever. It's not like we're
It
saying
is.
anything
I'm
new.
so glad that you noticed that without me even having to say it, because I started writing this book thinking it was going to be more about the funding and like all of the consequences, because we can look at like every statistic that we can find now and see how bad this has been for society. But as I was doing my research for the book and I'm profiling different prominent feminists throughout history, I just kept finding the same thing over and over and over, and I remember going to my husband and going, "This is crazy." It's like what always happens with them, they have a rebellious spirit for some reason or another. Through some act in their life, they start dabbling in some kind of occult ritual, whether it's spirit mediumship, going to a fortune teller, Rosicrucianism, Freemasonry, Theosophy, any of these different various Order of the Golden Dawn, any of these kind of occulty religions, and they all end up doing the exact same
Mhm.
thing. So this is what I found with every feminist activist almost to a T. If they have a family, they abandon their husband and their child to pursue this. Every single one. It happens in every chapter of the book. There are multiple women that do this. So they start out young, they get married, they have a family, they find feminism in one form or another and the occult. They abandon the family, they leave the children, they pursue polyamory, they pursue various forms of degeneracy. They always end up advocating for unaliving infants in the womb. I'm trying to be YouTube friendly here.
Mhm.
So almost all of them advocate for birth control and unaliving infants in the womb, for sexual liberation and free love, as you would have called it back then, and other various unspeakable things. So I told my husband, I was like, it can't be that no one else has ever just like not picked up on this, and that this part of the story hasn't been told. I've got to tell this part of it because it's so crazy how every single one of them,
Cycle.
Mhm.
all
Well,
of
it's
them,
But
it's
do you
Satan
all of them.
Satan wants to erase the history on purpose
Yeah.
because then he can hide it, and then it can be a fresh,
do you think
again, it can
there's
be a fresh take. If people don't know what's going on, there's no education,
Yeah.
he can use it fresh on them. So it makes
Hmm.
perfect sense why all this stuff's being erased and you have to go digging for it.
do you think
Yeah.
there's something unique about this cycle and the fact that maybe like the wealth and prosperity that
Mm.
we had here allowed it to grow because we had different technology, like you can get propaganda out, you can get
Yes.
all these things pushed forward, I think probably a lot easier than 500, 600 years ago.
Yes, I definitely do. So there's a reason that, like we talked about, this feminist spirit's always been there, but there's a reason it did not become the this is the dominant narrative across most of the world now. Most of the world. And one way you can tell this is that almost every nation on earth, except for a handful of countries in Africa and one country in the Middle East, which is Israel, are all well below replacement in birth rates now. That's a first in human history. It's never happened before. And every single one of these countries is to some degree and to a large degree affected by this rebellious feminist spirit. But the way that we kind of got there was this spreading of the ideology, the spreading of the occult stuff, this paganism or the witchcraft or the mixing of that in with Christianity, which is something I talk about a lot in the book.
Exactly. Yeah.
They'll mix it in and try to hide it in the Christianity and say that it's Christian when it's not. And so, yeah, like you were saying, it's kind of everywhere now. But the reason it didn't become this ubiquitous before is because we didn't have mass communications. We didn't have the technology we have. So it wasn't until the Industrial Revolution. I actually put it back to around the time of the printing press is when it really kind of started. But certainly the Industrial Revolution, because that's the thing that gives these women, if you guys ever watch any of my debates, these younger women now truly believe that they don't need men and that this modern world just built itself and it runs itself. I just wake up and my iPhone works and I turn on the switch and the lights come on and my car just runs. And they
love that clip
completely take
of
for granted that men are the ones that build this world for them that allows them to be boss girls. So
I love that clip of your husband debating, I think her name is Farah, on that topic, on how men have to be the enforcement arm of their little utopia anyway. So you're still dependent on men.
Yeah,
you know, that'd be a good point. Some of the we use it to cognitive dissonance. So pointing out some of the glaring ones that the feminists might have. You know, it's like, well, look at your circumstances, look at how we got here. Who are we blaming?
Right, exactly. But this is why it's so difficult. And me being a woman, I'm trying to get through to women, which a lot of times is perceived as mean. But this is because we've had it's close to 150 years of propaganda now. It's been completely saturated in the last 50, but I'd say it started about 150 years ago. But this idea that women are born innocent and altruistic, and they would never dream of harming anyone until either a man hurts them or the world corrupts them. And that's the only reason a woman would ever do anything less than angelic. And that
the church is super guilty of that.
Yes, the church yes. To varying degrees, all the churches, I'd say orthodoxy is the least affected so far, and part of that is just because
orthodoxy, the name itself kind of,
right.
elicits.
We still have patriarchs and we have patriarchates, and we have like kind of the whole principle of orthodoxy is we're the church of the first 1,000 years. We're not going to change, but they're not immune either. There are groups within orthodoxy trying very hard to push for like women deacons, female priests, for pushing feminism and LGBT stuff into our church too. It's all the churches. And the reason is because the churches are powerful. They affect people's perceptions of the world. They give people a guiding principle by which to live. So all of these powers we're talking about have always sought to infiltrate the church, whether it's the Vatican, whether it's the Protestants, it doesn't matter. All the Christian churches, they're trying really, really hard to push this stuff in there. And I think America is unique because we had this radical Protestant founding. We had this like the people who came here were the people who were too extreme for the European Protestants, right? They're the ones that like even the European Protestants were trying to hang them and stuff. So they came here. And they tended to be very progressive for their time and place, even though we now think of Puritans as like these stodgy, anti-sex, like uptight people. They were actually theologically pretty progressive for the time. There were a lot of Quakers, Unitarians, and things like that came here. These were kind of more radical. I wouldn't necessarily consider them Christian because like they don't even hold to the Apostles' Creed. But that's kind of the milieu that came out of the Northeast in early America was this burned over district. We had a lot of charismaticism and lots of lots of little breakaway cults that I cover in my book throughout the 1840s. And a lot of them mixed a lot of socialism in, or they mixed spiritualism in, or they mixed like Appalachian folk magic or English folk magic in with their whatever brand of Protestantism they kind of created.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
so
When you
that
look at it,
kind of allowed for a special situation in the States where we're anti-authoritarian, right? America was founded as like anti-Catholic Church, anti-king. So we don't like authority. And so this revolutionary spirit, it's very natural for Americans to be like very feminist and very anti-authority and very libertarian and like, you can't tell me what to do. Who are you to say? You know, that kind of thing. So I feel like here was like a special pressure cooker for feminism to really take off, especially with
That's
all the
good.
industrial,
and
the
it
Gilded
kind
Age.
of seems like Europe then just took our ideas and ran even further with it. I feel like they're 10 years ahead of us on a lot of that stuff. And they got
Yeah.
the Catholic Church right there, like supposedly supposed to hold back some of that stuff.
Well, what happened in Europe was, I mean, you got to remember that a lot of the like wealthy, more learned elites of the time were always going back and forth. So like Benjamin Franklin was constantly going to France or Britain and coming back. Same with Thomas Paine. Like a lot of the American revolutionaries would go to France and talk to French revolutionaries and write books with them and write pamphlets with them and you know, talk
Yeah,
and things
buddies.
like that. So these were the people that had the money to like go on ships back and forth and be in cahoots with each other and whatnot. But in Europe, it was more philosophical. Like a lot of the French existentialism in the 20th century really pushed feminism, like Simone de Beauvoir and things like that. So it was connected, but it was like slightly different in different places. But we kind of all ended up in the same spot for the most part. But everybody now is dealing with this thing that feminism does, which is pit man against woman and convince us that we're supposed to be in competition with each other rather than in collaboration with each other. And that, you know, if men have a monopoly on physical force, that means that everything they do is just to like press their fist down on us and keep us down so that they can have power and control. And young girls are really we're just taught this stuff from the time we can walk. If you even look at little girl cartoons, like little 2, 3, 4-year-old girls cartoons, it's girl power, it's like princess power, it's like it's very like female empowerment. Girls can do anything boys can do. uh you know, I'm never going to let a boy tell me what to do. It's from the time we're super little now. And so, and at name a pop star who's not a raging feminist. I mean, Taylor Swift, Beyonce, like all of the biggest pop stars on planet Earth, their main messaging is girl power. It's I'm a boss babe. I don't need a man. I will stomp the face of the patriarchy with my high-heeled shoe, right? It's sexual liberation. It's
God is a woman.
God is a woman, Ariana Grande, exactly. It's so all of the music, all of the movies, all of the TV shows, everything tells young girls that men are just there to cheat and beat. They're cheaters and beaters, and they just want to control you. They want to hold you down. They're there to oppress you. And so you have to be constantly looking for any sign, right? Just like keep your little feminist radar on all the time for any little sign that, oh, is he being controlling? So now the situation we have, and this is the problem, like I have young women reach out to me all the time and they kind of know they're doing this and they don't know how to even stop because they're like, yeah, anything, you know, if my boyfriend tells me no, I feel like he's being controlling. You know, for a man to have boundaries at all, for a man to ever say, "Yeah, honey, I know you want to spend money on that thing, but it's really not in the budget right now." It's like, "Oh, I see. You're just trying to control me. You're just trying to hold the money and control." So so it's like, is it shocking that we have sky high divorce rates, that most people aren't even bothering to get married because we've really convinced women that men are just inherently violent, they're inherently oppressive, that there's just something in them, like to be a man, to have masculinity at all is to want to crush women under your boot heel.
Do you have any, like, because that is like we were talking before offline before on how I was having this conversation with some people I know on like the perception is women had to come solve these problems that men were creating, like being abusive, alcoholic husbands, cheating on them all the time, etc. So, women had to come create social programs and stuff because they were always getting abandoned with children, blah, blah, blah. Do you have any data on kind of like debunking that?
Yes, I do. I do. I have an ocean of it. So if you go to my Substack, it's not the most recent post, but it's the one before it. It's called Our Patriarchs Protectors or something like that. I use some alliteration, I guess, in the title, but it goes over, that one goes over the most recent, like 45 years of data that we have unequivocally. It covers all the data that the National Incidence Studies have, which is like this massive nationwide federal program where they go through like women's shelters, family courts, prison systems, lawyers, like any kind of agency that would collect any sort of data on abuse of women or children, of like family situations with kids, any of that kind of stuff. And every like 15 years or so, they will compile all the data and they will tear it apart and look at how things are going. And this data, at least in the last 45 years, shows that not only are men the risk, like this is what feminism sold. Now, I'll back up just a little bit and tell you guys kind of how this happened. So remember how we were talking about how suffrage was so deeply unpopular and they were looking for ways to kind of wedge it in and get people to buy into it? One of the things they came up with, you've probably heard of the Christian Temperance Union, which was like a women's prohibition group that was pushing for prohibition laws. And there were some places and times, like on the frontier or where they were building railroads and things like that, where there was some problems with alcoholism, because honestly, a lot of the time they might not have had good food or water, and the booze is always safe to drink because it's fermented and, at least you won't get dysentery. So there were some places and times where the alcoholism was an issue, but it was not as widespread as a lot of people think. A lot of people think every man in the 1800s was just walking around hammered all day and just beating the crap out of everyone. Well, first of all, think about it for more than 2 minutes. How long do you think society would function? How do you think they built the great early skyscrapers, the railroads, the interstate systems? Like, how do you think we built the infrastructure of the country if this is how things were? No. So but there were groups that wanted to completely ban alcohol. A lot of these more progressive Christian groups thought that alcohol was like the root of all bad things and we need to ban it. And the people who wanted suffrage saw this and they went, aha, we can, now that we have magazines and periodicals, we can print horror stories about anytime a man does a bad thing. And we do this now to this day. You see this everywhere now. Man does bad thing. It's on the front page of every newspaper ever, which gives people the impression that this is just how men are, that this is just what men do. But if we go back and look at data, we can see that's not true. And there's a lot of ways we can see that's not true. One is in the last 50 years, if we look at what children's abuse. So people will say it's hard to know because women don't often report domestic abuse, right? They don't report it. So it goes unreported. We don't know how bad it is. But with children, it's a lot more reliable because children go to public schools, they go to daycare centers. There's a lot more oversight from other adults where even if the child doesn't report it, somebody may notice. So it's more reliable data. And when we look at that data, we see that actually men are less likely to abuse. Fathers are the least likely to abuse. Biological dads are actually the least likely to be abusers of their children. Mothers are number one, and people mothers bring into the home after kicking the dad out would be the next group that we would look at. So far and away, not even close. Children who live in the home with both biological parents are the safest on every level, from sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional, mental abuse, any type of neglect. It's by far to the order of like 10 or 12 times of magnitude safer for a child to live with both biological parents if they're married. The second safest is both biological parents cohabitating but not married. Everything else other than that is more and more and more dangerous for children. When you remove the father from the home is when the children have the worst outcomes. By far, it's not like a little bit. It's like out of this world crazy how dangerous and how the risk factor goes up for every bad thing that can happen to a child when you remove his father from the picture. Children who are in substance abuse treatment centers, children who are in mental health facilities, children who are homeless, children who are on ADHD or depression or anxiety medication, children who are ended up in a juvenile facility. It's like 70, 80, 90% of them have no dad in the home.
Yeah.
It's
You wonder
Sounds
why
like
it's
a
victim factory. Yeah.
It
The
is. It
perfect
is.
people to end up taking, to buy this stuff. They're going to
Yeah,
buy
so
the
you would
feminine.
think if fathers were the primary threat, and this is what this whole Substack piece I wrote was about, because I get this pushback a lot, so I wanted to like really dig into the data and find out like what's the real picture. And it was way worse than I even thought. Like I was shocked myself. I was like, wow, this is way worse than I thought. But it turns out that fathers and husbands are actually the biggest buffer to abuse and bad outcomes of anyone. Mothers are the most likely to abuse children. Women tend to be the ones that initiate domestic violence more often than men. And this is the big thing. So men have a monopoly on physical force, so they learn from a young age. You know, when little boys do rough and tumble play and they kind of learn the limits of what's fun and what's, oh, I hurt somebody and I didn't mean to. This is like a really crucial thing little boys learn from tussling with each other, from tussling with their dad, from wrestling with boys that are bigger or smaller than them. Boys learn like where the limits are on physicality in a way that girls don't. I don't think, when they're young. So when we see women have a monopoly on force, so in a situation, for example, where a woman is a juvenile prison guard, like kids that are in a juvie facility and there's a female guard, the female guards are far more likely to abuse that power than the male guards are. Same thing with women's prisons. Male prison guards far less likely to abuse inmates than female prison guards. So when women do, in the few situations that women do have a monopoly on force, they seem more likely to abuse that authority and that monopoly than men are. And I think it's because they never learn those limits the way that men find out. Like if your mouth writes a check that your butt can't cash, you're going to find out quick, right?
Well,
Where
let's-
women
Biscuit.
don't really
Yeah.
learn that.
I was gonna say she likes metal, dude. We love
It-
metal too.
It shows in the
Some good old
lesbian
Fred
relationships
Durst right
too.
there. Yeah, I was gonna bring that up. The lesbian race, they got the highest violence, right? Is that right?
Yes,
Domestic. Do
lesbian
you know the
couples
actual
have the
like,
highest rates of domestic violence.
how much more is it in their relationships?
It's quite a lot more. I think it goes lesbian couples, and then I think even homosexual male couples are higher. But the thing that I thought was really striking was that cohabitating heterosexual couples have like really high rates of abuse. And this is something that the women's liberation movement really sold hard in second and third wave. So like 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, they told women that marriage is this like scary trap. You're going to marry a man. He's going to get you in his clutches. He's going to have control of the finances and he'll have the career and you won't have a way to support yourself. So he's going to abuse you because he knows he can and you're going to be stuck, right? This was the propaganda campaigns around this were incredible. In fact, they falsified numerous statistics throughout the 60s and 70s. There was a campaign in the 70s where they ran commercials and ads in magazines telling women that 1 out of 3 women who ended up in an emergency room were there because of domestic assault. Totally false, totally bullshit, bogus statistic, which now they went back and checked this and did like a study to find out if this was true. It was actually 0.01% of women in emergency rooms were there because of domestic assault. They took like some other number and tried to pass it off as this number knowingly. And they don't care. They're totally unrepentant about this. They just used it to fearmonger the hell out of women that marriage is the single biggest threat to your safety, that your husband and your child's father is the threat you need to worry about, when actually that's the person most likely to protect you. That's the person with the vested interest in protecting you and your children. And by removing him, guess who comes in? Who wants to come into the home with the single mom with kids? Predators. That's who. And that's what we find. We find that women who are single moms, when a boyfriend or whoever comes in the home, that the instance of abuse goes up like 20-fold from what it would with the biological father. It's insane. But most women actually believe the opposite. They actually believe that marrying a man is the biggest threat.
Right. So we got just for a second. So kind of go over all the information. So essentially we got these guys, right? Now this is all a plan from the beginning. We know these are demons. We know this is spiritual warfare that's going on.
Yes.
And the money is the root of all kinds of evil. These guys see an opportunity to get cheap labor, and these use these feminists who are into the occult and make this labor force, create this educational system that's going to aid them in this revolution, fill in the factory workers. And also it's going to create a long-term supply of this, cognitive dissonance kind of becoming the norm. And then these little victim factories, which are these destroyed families, which are going to produce more and more of these victims that they can kind of leech onto. So where do you see things going now as far as like a future for, I know you must have thought about this because you are the most studied person on the subject. And I'm just curious, like, where do you see this thing going?
Yeah.
Well, the good news, I would say, if you want a white pill, is that it's completely unsustainable. So we have countries like South Korea that right now are at a 0.78 birth rate. So the average South Korean woman isn't even replacing herself, let alone getting married and having 2.1 kids, which is the replacement. In the United States, it's like 1.6. Most of the world is well below replacement. We are actually on the verge of population collapse, when a lot of people still believe that we have too many people. They go, but the population is still growing. And I'm like, yeah, there's this thing called population momentum, which means we're waiting for like this older generation to die, and then there won't be anyone to replace them. And you can see that this is a problem, because a lot of countries like Canada and Japan are now introducing government aided unaliving of oneself. Have you guys seen these programs where if you have any kind of chronic illness or you have depression or something, they'll give you assisted unaliving of yourself as a treatment option?
That's so
And
messed up.
well, I mean, what does the demonic want to do?
Well, that's what I was actually, I thought about that as Joe kind of went through that, like, kind of our masculine brains think about it that way. And thank you for that, Joe. It's great. I was thinking about Satan, like God wants a big family. One of my favorite teachers that talks on this demon stuff is Michael Heiser. And he always kind of ends his lectures after he goes super deep on this academic theology. And he's like, you know what, guys, God just wants a really big family. So he wants as much of us with him.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about the difference between Satan. Satan just wants the species to stop. It's not that he wants a lot of people in hell. He'd be content if there's one person in hell, and that was Adam or Eve. And that blows my mind when I hear that, because that's exactly what he wants. He just wants it to end. He wants all of humanity to just stop.
Yes. So this woman I was telling you about, Alexander Kollontai, the Bolshevik woman, she was the very first one to make abortion not only legal, but paid for in state hospitals right up until birth with no questions asked. So the USSR had this terrible, by the time Stalin took power, they had 3 abortions for every 1 live birth in Russia. Because of this one woman and her idea that women should be labor units instead of mothers, and that the nuclear family had to go, and the first thing we have to do is get rid of fathers and paternity altogether, and that children don't even need to know who their dads are because the state is Lenin is their daddy. She literally said, Lenin is your god, Lenin is your daddy, that's all you need to know. Yeah. So Stalin even had to reverse that, because he was like, we're gonna get overrun by our enemies if this continues. So they reversed it, but Russia to this day is still dealing with some of the highest rates of that in the whole world.
And I heard that he's about to outlaw it.
Yeah, Putin wants to.
Because I'm sure he's doing the math on this population collapse, and that would be wild to have them go from the high. Because like they're the highest abortion rate in the world, and then he's going to
Yes.
outlaw it. Be
Yes.
wild. And I saw Kim Jong-un was like pleading for women to have children.
Yes.
Like, it's interesting to see this reversal.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just like what you guys just said, the demonic wants you as the image bearer of God to disappear yourself. That's what the whole idea is. The whole idea is you were created as this favored, blessed icon of Christ himself. And I want that destroyed. So how does he do that? It's hard to do that. It's hard to get to the man, right? It's harder to get to the man. It's easier to go through the woman, because the woman, I mean, Mary is the Ark of the New Covenant who brought Christ into the world. She through motherhood enabled the salvation of mankind, and the demonic don't want that. They try to convince every woman not to do that. Get on birth control. Now's not the time. You're too young. What about your career? What about security? What if this? What if this? What if this? And what I always say to young women is, they will fearmonger you to death about what could happen if you have children and let your man be the provider. This happened to me. So as a smart girl, nerdy person who was expected to go to college and have some big career, I had my first daughter unplanned at 20 years old. And everybody around me thought it was the greatest tragedy. It was the worst thing that could have, it was like any great tragedy of history. It was the worst thing that could have happened, is like my life was over, right? And I didn't feel that way. I was like, well, it's a little sooner than I planned, but this is great. And when she was born, I just thought, why would I go to some crap job and care about my stupid, $12 an hour or whatever I'm making? Like, this is what I need to be doing. There's nothing I'll ever do that's more important than raising this brand new human being, right? And even the Christian women in my life fear-mongered me so bad about, but what about your career? And you can't depend on your husband for that, because what if he leaves? What if he dies? What if you decide you're not happy anymore? Oh, think of all the things that could happen. And I remember saying, wait a minute. If I was going to college and getting into, an average woman has $40,000 in college debt now. Okay. She starts her young life in $40,000 of debt on average. A lot of them much more than that. They only make about $40,000 a year on average, because we pick degrees and stupid crap that, doesn't make a lot of money. And so we tell women, invest the first 22 years of your life in your education, then spend your 20s building a career. And then after that, you can think about starting a family. Well, by then, you're already in the twilight of your fertile years. So let's say you do this and you get married at 30, which is the average age now that the American woman gets married, is around 30. And you have your first baby at 31. I'll be super generous and say it happens pretty quick. You have your first baby at 31. Well, you're going to be lucky to get 2, maybe 3. And then on top of that, you're thinking about, well, I still have to pay off all this college debt. And I feel like I should go back to work, because why else did I invest all this time and money into building a career if I'm just going to never go back to work? So this is a wonderful plan. If you are Lucifer, if you're a demonic entity and you don't want image bearers of Christ coming into the world and becoming Christians, it's a great way to stop that from happening, is convince all the women that children are a ball and chain, they're a prison, they're going to hold you back. And I always say, hold you back from what? What are you doing that is so, your interior design career? Oh, they're holding you back from your interior design career or from your retail management job? Like, have you ever looked at the top 20 jobs that women do? Now, I'm not saying women don't do important things. What I'm saying is women do the same stuff they did 100 years ago for their family, their home, and their community, but now they do it for a corporation, and they pay most of what they earn in childcare and taxes. And then they still have to go home and try to be mothers and wives. And it's no wonder that this isn't working. The same stuff we did 100 years ago is what we do now. We're bookkeepers, we're nurses, we're cooks, we are front desk people, we are clerical workers, we're child care people, we are early childhood educators. We do the same things we used to do, but now we do them for daddy corporation and daddy government, and we've replaced fathers with the corporations and the government. And women are
There's something
26%. Just give me 30 seconds on my
Please.
soapbox, guys. I'm so sorry.
Please.
26% of American women are on at least one psych drug prescription. 26% of American women are on at least one psychiatric drug. The instance of fetal alcohol syndrome has gone up 2.5 times in the last 30 years. Women are far and away having the most problems with alcohol, even more
they're
than
the
men
biggest
do
binge
now.
drinkers now.
Yes, and it's more detrimental to our health. So even if we drink like the same amount as men, like proportional to our size, it is worse on our organs and things like that because our hormones are different. We're just not smaller men, you guys. We're not. We are different than men. And so trying to push us into the business world and push us into competing with men and having careers and having to be our own boss, it's extremely stressful. Men have a 24-hour hormone cycle. You guys just have like testosterone pumping and you're pretty much the same. We don't have that. We're not made for that. We're not made to be on birth control for 20 years at a time. And it's like we wonder why women have the highest incidence of mental illness, the worst health outcomes, the worst addiction outcomes. Women who go through divorce are extremely financially susceptible, far more so than their married counterparts. This is the worst deal women ever took. So I'm not trying to talk women out of something that's been wonderful for them. I'm trying to talk them out of something that is literally killing them and destroying them and making them miserable and tearing them away from God. And the worst way that it tears women away from God is it convinces them that there is no need for humility and there's no need for repentance because they're perfect the way they are and they can't do anything wrong.
That's awesome.
Facts.
Preach it. I had a question.
Okay, I'll get off the soapbox now. Sorry.
That was wonderful. No, you always answer the questions I'm going to ask anyway. So I'm just like, let her talk because she's going to hit all the bullets I could ever think of and a couple more. That's right. So, and you have for the majority of this. I was thinking about the women who do choose to have, because I've run into this a lot, where the women that I know will have kids and they're not happy with their kids. They're unhappy and they almost bought into the lie, like I'm missing out. I don't have enough freedom. And my first thought was, well, it's because they're working and they're not spending time with their kids. Otherwise, that reciprocity with being a mother around her children would fill that void. But I don't know if I'm right. So is it the fact that they've like legitimately been brainwashed down to their metaphysical DNA where they can have kids and they still won't be happy? Or is it that they're not spending enough time with their kids, so they're not really understanding what motherhood actually is and what it has to offer them?
Yeah, that's a huge question. And I think what's really at the heart of it is this idea that, making a sandwich for your husband is slavery, but making a sandwich for, Subway Corporation is freedom. And it's the same kind of thing with kids where it's like, we're in such a materialist worldview and oh my goodness, like I thought it was bad, like I knew it was bad, but my husband just did a series of appearances on the Whatever podcast. And if you guys have never seen the Whatever podcast, it's a dating podcast where they talk to a lot of modern women. A lot of them are on OnlyFans. Some of them are college students or boss girls, things like that. And he asked them, like, why are you doing this? Why would you choose the OnlyFans path? Why are you foregoing family for career? And they went around the table and each one of them said, because it's freedom. I need to do what makes me happy. I want to do what makes me feel good. And he said, so hedonism. And they were like, what? He was like, yeah, so there you have no bigger purpose than just like your immediate gratification, whatever makes it, like the clicks, the likes, the attention, the money, the vacations, the trips, the outfits, like that is what they've learned to value. And if you only have this materialist view of life, you can't see children as anything other than a net drain on that, right?
Yeah.
Children just become this resource, time, money sucking machines. There's no incentive to have children because
Well, look at the whole dink trend that's like all over the internet.
I
That's
know.
dual income, no kids, and they just brag about their life. Like, I got all
Yep.
this money.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's an ontological crisis that we have. If you look at 500, 1,000 years ago, men were willing to spend their whole lives working on building a cathedral they weren't going to see completed in their lifetime. Things that took hundreds of years to build that you're never going to really see it even in your lifetime, but you think it's so worthwhile and it transcends you to the point that it's worth investing your whole life in. And we not only do we not have that anymore, but now it's just like, give me my dopamine hits. Give me my quick dopamine hits. Give me my likes. Give me my these women in a way I do hold them responsible because I think it's best for them to hold them responsible, but also the way that we treat women now from the time they're young, and this happened to me. So you're just a normal little kid, right? You're a little girl growing up, and suddenly this thing happens when you're 12, 13, and your body changes and you go through maturity, and suddenly everyone around you treats you different. All the boys want attention from you. They're willing to do whatever it takes, and it's worse now than it was when I was growing up. They'll do whatever to get any kind of attention from you. Like, have you guys seen some of the weird stuff where it's like these men will pay girls money to like insult them or pay money to demean them and stuff like that? It's like any attention's better than no attention. So girls get used to this idea that like, whoa, I have this amazing gold mine that I'm literally sitting on, and I can use it to get anything I want. I can get attention. I can get validation. I can be told I'm like, there was a girl on this podcast who was probably 350, 400 pounds. And she was telling my husband, I'm gorgeous. I'm one of the most beautiful women in the world.
Yuck.
I'm big, but I get, I'm on this ad campaign and they fly me here and they fly me there and she has an OnlyFans, right? And so it's like she thinks that she is God. She believes she is God. She's never going to submit to any man, let alone God even, because she's like, I'm God. I get everything I want. All I have to do is post a picture. All I have to do is put this out there and I get everything I want. So
But they don't realize they're actually slaves, massive slaves, and therefore they're slaves to their desires, they're slaves to their passions, and therefore
Yes.
they're slaves ultimately to the Satan, because he can now control them at ease. Like, they have no willpower. There's nothing born into them other than themselves, the worship of self.
What's
Which
blown my mind lately is a lot of, like, I've heard probably 3 breakups in the last year, and these are not like these OnlyFans girls on whatever podcast. These are just average kind of Midwest girls, actually. Like, the breakup, part of the reason is they don't want children, and the man wants children.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what?
Yeah,
like, usually that's flipped.
Yeah, I've seen that too. Yeah,
I see that too. And I have women that talk to me about this on social. I say talk to me, that's a little generous. They'll say stuff to me like, oh, it must be so rough for you because you're just a gross baby factory. Look at you, you've had 5 kids and you're 43 and now you're like used goods and I still look amazing and I can travel to Tahiti whenever I want. And they're like, trying to flex on me, but I'm kind of like, ma'am, the wall is undefeated. Okay. Like, it's going to happen. They look at J-Lo or Madonna or somebody and they think that's going to be them. And first of all, that's not going to be you. Second of all, even if it was, like, even if the technology allows you to look like that forever, there just comes a point where being a blow up doll can't be all it's cracked up to be. And at the end of your life, what are you going to have? Like, I put in all the hard work on the front end of my life, but in the second half of my life, I've got a husband who loves me for a lot more than what I look like, right? He's clearly not with me because I'm plumped and tucked and everything's propped up and, artificially inflated to make certain proportions and everything. he loves me for like way more than that. Like you can't replace me. These blow up doll ladies can't replace me because they'll never be the mother of his children. They'll never be the person who went through 16 years of really tough things with him and stayed by his side and stayed loyal and all those transcendental things that you guys and I all think make life worth living. And these people have been deceived into thinking that just this material world is going to be enough. And they'll flex on you all day about it, but it's like, okay, then why are almost all of you on anti-anxiety meds, antidepressants? Why do most of you have to party all the time or go to nonstop ayahuasca tea ceremonies, right? To keep your good vibes going and all this stuff.
The trend we've been noticing that's kind of hilarious is they make these I'd call them cope reels. And there's a huge trend of it's the same soundtrack. And the woman posts like, I'm 36 and single with no kids, and here's my amazing life.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why do you need to post that?
Yeah.
Like I've been to all these
like,
places
I
and
got
stuff
up at
like
noon, and then I ate an edible and I went back to bed until 4. And then I got up and tried on new outfits that I bought from Amazon. And then I went to a Beyonce concert. And then I had cocktails after. And like that's my life. And tomorrow I might binge watch my favorite Netflix thing. And it's like that is all demonic deception. You are basically being sucked into a matrix and you're convinced that this is like really living. And I think a lot of them maybe they don't know better because they were born, into a single mother household and like maybe they don't know. Like my husband and I always say this. They're like, we feel like we have like some great secret and we're trying to share it with everyone because we feel like we have this great life that was born out of struggling together and, going through struggles with our faith together. We lost a child together. Like we've been through serious stuff and we've stuck it out with each other and we've never given up on each other. And we are close in a way that very few people understand. Like very few people will ever get the kind of bond that we have with each other, and we're close with our kids and we have really deep meaningful friendships. We have people in our church and brothers and sisters in Christ with us that we're super close with. And I feel like this is how I would tell it to a boss lady who thinks she has it so good. It's like when I get up in the morning, I also do what I want for the most part. Yes, my life is about service to others, but I kind of get to decide what the priority is. Okay, let's all get up and have a nice breakfast. We won't get up at 6 a.m. to rush you guys to daycare or get you on the school bus. We'll get up at 8 and we'll have a nice home cooked breakfast. And then we'll do our homeschool, which by the way, takes us like an hour and a half a day. You do not have to spend 7 hours a day when you're not in a public school. You can get a tremendous amount of awesome things done in short order. And really just the way we live our life is kind of school. You know what I mean? Like there's always,
I like
we're
that.
just always learning through living, and my kids are always with me. And so they learn everything that I'm doing. And, we have together time all the time. If somebody gets sick, it's not super stressful. I don't have to like call into work or scramble to find a babysitter. It's like, oh, one of the kids is sick, so we'll just we'll take it easy today and we'll catch up a little bit next week. And I'm actually the person who's in control of my life. I don't have to like punch in at a certain time and answer to a boss and obey the corporate rules that they have where it's like, oh, you've been late 2 times in the last 6 months. We're going to write you up. You don't have to deal with any of that, right? My boss is a guy that I'm in love with and I think is like really attractive and he likes me too. So it's like, I feel like, how can you think that my situation is like the oppressive bad deal and that you're like the liberated happy one when I wake up every day feeling like I'm living the dream because everything I do matters to me a lot. I don't have to waste time with nonsense much at all.
Well, I think a part of the lie that they're sold is because of their complete lack of ability to pick quality men. So they view submitting to the men they've been dating the last 5-10 years as like, are you kidding me? And it's like, I just went through like, 4 F boys the last couple years. And like, yeah, I'm not submitting to any of those. So they don't even think it's possible.
I agree with that too. I've kind of said that before. I'm like, I might have a slight blind spot because I feel like I have a really great husband, but I wasn't always perfect and I didn't always do everything right either. I lived with my boyfriend when I was young. I went through a divorce. I did what the world did. I was raised by a Marxist feminist mom who told me these things were fine to do and wonderful. And I just was kind of drifting through life a little bit. And when I really started to change is when I did have my first daughter. I mean, at least the Lord saved me that way and woke me up to things a little bit after that happened. And then I slowly over the years really got my act together. And I had to do a lot also to like repent and change from those bad habits. It wasn't like an overnight thing where like, oh, now I'm magically a trad wife and I wear the floral dresses and I curl my hair. It's like I had to learn a lot of when I was being a big mouth or being rebellious or when I was kind of out of pocket with my attitude and things like that. But my husband, God bless him, he gently and lovingly like helped me figure that stuff out. Like he would be like, I'd be like acting crazy or something and he would kind of lovingly just be like, "Really, Rachel? Like calm down for like women love it when you tell them to calm down, by the way. That's pro tip. Tell them to calm down. They love that.
Works every time.
He would just be there's a story I like to tell where when we were first dating, he said some stupid thing that made me mad and I threw something at him. I threw like a remote control at him and he just looked at me like,
You're insane.
he went, "If you're the kind of girl that's going to throw stuff at me, I will leave today and never come back." And he did leave. He was like, "I'm gonna go home now and just like let you think about that." And at first I was very huffy. I was like, well, I don't know who he thinks he is. And but then I thought about it for a couple minutes and I was like, oh, do I want to be the girl that throws stuff? Like, maybe I should rethink that. And it did get me thinking about like, where did I learn that? Where along the way did I decide that that was acceptable to do just because he's a man? Like I can throw something at him, So it was like little things like that that over time helped me figure out like, okay, this is how I'm sabotaging my own happiness because I wanted a family. My parents were divorced. Like I said, my mom was this like crazy feminist who just destroyed our whole family. And I didn't want that. I didn't want that. And it took a lot of like really looking at myself and my own flaws and sorting all of that out and being like, yeah, you don't have a good attitude here, or you put up a wall here where you're acting like a brat, or is it unreasonable for your husband to say, would you mind making me some dinner? Like those kind of things. But we're so programmed, like he can make it his damn self. He can get up and get his own sandwich and that kind of attitude, right? And it's like, but I tell women all the time, I'm like, you defer to authority all the time. The only person whose authority you think you shouldn't defer to is your husband. That's it. If a policeman tries to pull you over, you're going to pull over. If your boss tells you that you need to be there on time, you'll get there on time. Women are very obedient, like in school. Girls are very obedient in school. They always follow the rules. They follow the rules in university. They follow the rules at work. They follow the rules anywhere they are. But we've somehow convinced them that if your husband has any sort of boundaries at all, that's abuse. And that is pure sabotage. That is not there to help you, ladies. That is there to destroy your family and to get you to sabotage your own happiness and convince you that the man who loves you the most is actually your enemy. And that's not true. It's a lie.
How do you think we and I see we're like we'll kind of wrap it up, I think, on this kind of question line. How do we reach these young girls that are brainwashed in this mindset? Because I think it's like it's much easier. I see like girls past 30 to have these conversations because you have a lot of them that go through the epiphany stage, as like Rollo says.
Yes.
And so I think that conversation is much easier then. But man, like a young 20s girl that's beautiful, it's just like seems hopeless.
It's super hard. Honestly, I do think that the power rests with the men. It rests with you men who, if you guys stop, if all of the like more high status, desirable men tomorrow go, you know what? No, I'm not going to go for the Taylor Swifts and the Nina Ingdals and the Beyoncés. I would like a girl who is meek and mild and submits to Christ, and that's who I'm holding out for. Women will respond to that. The thing about women is we are very susceptible to propaganda, to social shame, to societal pressure, and especially to what men want, the high status men. So a big problem is simps, right? If you have all of these incel simp guys who are willing to sell or send Belle Delphine hundreds of dollars for her dirty bathwater, then yeah, you're going to keep seeing this kind of stuff. But when the more desirable men in society kind of take a stand and go, and they're starting to, the good news is they're kind of starting to, they're going, yeah, I don't think I'm going to do this secular marriage stuff with you, where I basically sign a legal contract wherein you have all the incentive to leave and I'm the only one who gets punished if a divorce happens. I think I'm not going to do that. And that sort of thing. Women still do want male attention. Some of them won't admit it, but they do. And that's why you see women that are in their 30s and 40s still going on Tinder dates and going, I just can't find, all the men are shit, I just can't find one. It's like, well, yeah, but that's because the men who are worth having are going to have certain standards. This is the problem. Like, I've talked to multiple women who have this issue where they're like, I want one of those good men. I want one of those, like, really, like, like, he's strong, he's handsome, he's successful, he takes care of his responsibilities, he's going to be a good dad. They tell you all about the man they want. And I'm like, yeah, that man will never put up with your attitude. No. Ever.
Or that's the disadvantage that women do have versus, because men, we get disqualified by a woman like to our face, like, because we are the approacher, but men disqualify women silently, so they don't even know that they're getting disqualified or what they need to change to fix that. And especially with social media today, a lot of us just pull up their Instagram and be like, nope.
Yep, exactly. And so it's like, if you're an attractive young woman and you're watching this and you want one of those, like, I want a godly man who's this and this and this, and you've got this Prince Charming kind of guy in your mind that you want, just know that kind of man, especially if you want someone who's going to provide a good quality life for you, he's going to make good money and things like that. Number one, he's not going to have endless amounts of time and attention for you. You can't demand that a man make a lot of money and be a leader and be like this respectable guy, and then he's going to have unlimited amounts of time for like your nonsense. Those kind of men are the kind of men who are going to kiss you in the morning, they're going to be off to work, and they're going to be busy. All the men around them are going to want a piece of their time, all of their employees, anyone they supervise in their work, their friends, their family. My husband's one of these guys. He's a very, very busy guy because he's like so capable. He's so competent. He's very good at everything he does, and everybody around him respects him and wants a little piece of his time. So I learned, like, okay, he doesn't have endless amounts of attention for me. Doesn't mean I'm not important. That doesn't mean I'm not important. It just means, if I want him to be this successful, respectable leader of men and this pillar of the community, I'm not going to get 100% of his time, and that's fine. He makes time for me. He makes time for the kids, but I also have to leave him the hell alone sometimes so he can get things done. And men like that, if you don't respect their boundaries, they're just going to get rid of you. And they won't negotiate it with you first. They're not going to like give you 1,000 chances. It'll just be done. It'll just be, thank you, but no, this isn't working, and you'll be done. So if you're a woman who wants one of those guys, you have to look at yourself and find where you're high maintenance, find where you have a bad attitude, find where your weaknesses are like that, and fix those things so that you're the kind of woman that's attractive to a man who wants the kind of woman who's a good helpmate, right? You're going to be an asset to him rather than like an endless drain on his time, energy, and attention. And that's not abuse. We've been like brainwashed that a man like that is abusive, or like he's cold, or he's not, or he lacks emotional intelligence. Another thing I hate.
It's a made up word.
Yeah, it's totally made up nonsense. Don't listen to any of that. And if you want a guy you can kick around and step on, you're also not going to be attracted to him. That's the other thing. If you want a guy who's just going to lay down and let you walk all over him, you're not going to respect him. You're not going to be attracted to him. Yes, you'll be the boss, but at what cost? Like, is that really what you want? No, it's not what you want. That's why women write serial killers love letters and they date like gangbangers, because at least those guys won't let you walk all over them. It sounds crazy, but that's like a fundamental thing in women's psychology, that we want a man who's not going to let us walk all over him. But we have a culture that says he's abusive if he doesn't just defer to you on everything. Now, I hope it's obvious that I'm not saying it's good for men to abuse women. Of course it's not. Of course, in the church, we would never allow such a thing. And there's always, even in the Catholic Church and in the Orthodox Church especially, there's always been permission for divorce in those extenuating circumstances where, like, you're abandoned, abandonment, severe abuse, things that can't be reconciled. And the priest may say, okay, at this point, a divorce is like the lesser of the two evils. Okay. But we live in a culture now that it's like, if a man has any standards, if he has any boundaries, if he's willing to tell you no, your friends are all going to go, girl, you need to leave him. He is abusive. And if he really loved you, he would blah, blah, blah. Don't listen to any of that. That's the other thing. Your friends are going to sabotage the hell out of you. If you're a young, beautiful woman and you find one of these really good men, your girlfriends are going to, whether willingly or unwillingly, like knowingly or unknowingly, often sabotage you by telling you that whatever he's doing is toxic or whatever. Ask your priest, ask your pastor if you're not sure. Hopefully you have a solid church with a good priest or a pastor who isn't like one of these feminist pastors or something. But if you have a solid church, go to your priest or pastor if you have an issue and you're not sure. But don't listen to female friends, because they're going to, if they're single, they're going to, like, a lot of times subconsciously sabotage that too.
Man, look at the girl you're dating, her friends. That's a huge one that I'm like now paying attention to.
Yeah.
Friends.
I had a friend like that when I started dating my husband, like right off the bat. And she there was signs that she was this way, but about a month into us dating, she was like, I just really feel like he's going to be abusive and controlling. And I just really don't want to see that happen to you. So, like, I just feel like you either need to choose him or me. And I was like, okay, him.
Jeez.
And she was just like, what? And I was like, yeah, him. Because if you were really my friend, you wouldn't say that to me. Like, you wouldn't be
ultimatums like that. Crazy.
Yeah.
Well, I think
16 years later, I'm still with the husband. So I
there
think it
you
was
go.
the right
Made
call.
the right choice. I think as believers, the hard sell on the gospel is showing that we're here to serve. We're giving things without that idea of reciprocity, which is totally anti-world.
Yes.
And that's what you learn by being a parent, right? You starting early, you're giving yourself to something that's not giving you anything in the form of equity back. You're getting nothing back from that. So we have to be trained in that idea of love, that, like Thomas Aquinas says, love is to desire the good of the other. Well, in order to understand what that is, you need to understand the other, not be so self-consumed. And that's what's interfering, as I'm hearing you speak, with the woman being able to find her fulfillment in marriage, in motherhood, is being able to self-sacrifice the way Christ taught us. The incarnation of Christ is that exactly. Right. And giving ourselves that deeper level of fulfillment, which is what we get with Christ. Yeah. And it's good you're pointing that out, that self-examination phase. Like, I know there's a lot of really intelligent women out there, hyper rational, that can look at themselves and they can talk themselves into any crazy place they want to. And it almost works to their demise because of that hyper rationality. And having Christ in your heart is what really gives you the discernment to have that humility to say, like, why did I throw that remote, or why was I being overbearing, or how can I serve my wife to a place that's not just being sort of feminized husband, but serving her and correcting her or leading her. Like, that is service too. Yeah. Service is not just making her happy. Service is being able to lead a confused creature that you love so much into a place where they actually have some connection with you. Ultimately, that's what they want. And that is a means and a way to getting that. So I'm hearing that very strongly. And I'm also hearing that that you're saying women are more easily sort of manipulated by outside circumstance, but they won't be manipulated by their husband. It's just a horrible situation. And I see that happening with all the young women, that interferes with their relationship with their father, which interrelate with their mother. And this whole thing just cascades down
Yeah.
into wrecked relationships.
Yeah, the
And
whole situation is inverted, and that's always a sign of the demonic. Whenever something is flipped on its head upside down or flipped inside out, that's demonic inversion. And I think one of the hardest sells, but I hope if women are listening to this, they'll just trust me and give it a shot. Like if you're a young lady and you're in a marriage, or even if you're older and you're in a marriage and you're in a rough spot with your husband, and you married him because you thought he was a great guy and you love him, and you know that there's like a solid foundation there, but you're struggling, I would say challenge yourself for 30 days. For 30 days, be like wildly, throw away all caution, throw away all like reckless abandon, just love that man like it's his last 30 days on earth, like it's your last 30 days on earth, like it's all you've got. Don't think about the consequences of it. Don't try to manipulate events. Don't try to like act a certain way to get a certain result out of him. Just for 30 days, just love him like Sarah loved Abraham when she called him Lord. Don't listen to what your friends say or what your family says or what Taylor Swift says. Just everything you can do for him. Get his breakfast in the morning before he goes to work. Iron his clothes for him. Do every little thing, every little loving thing you can do. Be generous with him, in your love life. Be just anything you can do to not give him grief, anything you can do to not oppose him on things big and small, even just little stuff. Like if he wants to turn the heat down, let him turn the heat down and put on a sweater. Just every little thing you can think of. Try to be as giving and as selfless as you can and defer to him, and try to be that like Proverbs 31 wife, the wife that Sarah was to Abraham. It's going to be hard, okay? It's going to be like a hard challenge to do for 30 days. But if you can do that for 30 days, you watch what kind of a man he becomes. You just watch what kind of a husband he becomes. It will bring out every good thing in that man. You will see your husband turn into a man you didn't know he could be if you do that. Because that was like my husband and I hit a pivotal point where it was like we were either going to divorce or not, and we were like right on the brink, and this was early on, but I was like, look, I'm gonna give it everything I've got for like a month. Like I'm gonna give it everything I have for a month, and if that doesn't work, then I'll know, right? Then there's nothing more I could do. And it brought out this man that I like, the man I thought maybe he could be in my wildest dreams, but better.
Yeah.
And it's just gotten better since then. And if you can overcome that demonic trick that tells you to constantly butt heads, to constantly provide resistance, to resist him on everything, to just, it's like your instinct to, if he wants something for you to go, well, but what about this? Or, but I don't think we should, just if you can quiet that, if you can resist that, just watch what happens. It's literally like magic. Just try it. Just trust old Rach and give it a shot. And then email me after a month and tell me how it went, because I want to hear like if women actually try this. But it's pretty
and that's
magical.
especially true for believers, right? I mean,
yeah,
that's a good challenge for people who have
and
God.
you know what else? It's hard, but you'll start finding that you actually are really enjoying the dynamic.
Right.
Like it's this wonderful thing that happens when you take away that like Luciferian resistance that's in the relationship. When you can pull that aside and get rid of it, it's like this wonderful dynamic that you've never known with a man before. That's so wonderful. And I wish more women could experience it. I just wish
They're
more women could
experiencing
have that.
rebellion. Like what
Yeah.
they're actually thinking is like them speaking their mind. It's actually rebellion. It's like when you come to that harmony, you're actually providing ideas together, and the communication grows so much exponentially.
Or it's all
more.
transactional.
It's not,
like,
or it's,
I'm only going to do this if he does this.
Yeah, based on transact. There's no service in there, and I think like that's where, like you were saying, the top's been flipped over, and it's like even when you think about the bowl of lentils selling the birthright, or this knowledge, and then you get death, and the way that the women are very disenfranchised now, like even more than they've ever been. They're unhappy, like with the statistics that you brought to us, that you so eloquently like described, is like they're not happier. Like these things they're not bringing fulfillment to them. And yes, they're getting sold this lie. Here is freedom without sacrifice, but indeed they're actually sacrificing more of things that they cannot get back. You can't get your early 20s and your 30s back.
Right.
You're not going to be able to live this life later on in life. You won't be like this hot 70, 60-year-old. That's got a massive, that's just insane to even think that you're going to be this sex, object at that age.
Madonna.
And the idea of like a normal progression and leaving a legacy in life has been they don't glamorize it, they demonize it. And I just love hearing your stories, because it brings the beauty and like because people need to be sold things nowadays. It's like we are fighting against that. What was that fellow that you said early on, the father of like advertisement or something like that, the dude that was selling the cigarettes and all that to women?
Oh yeah, Edward Bernays.
Bernays, right?
Yeah.
It's like this is the world we're living in. No one's doing
Yes.
the deep dive, the red pill, which means truth. We're looking for
Right.
truth. We just want to be sold like these charismatic ideals that fall in line with whatever gives us dopamine the quickest, which just turns us into little slaves. We're just little slaves going on here. And it's crazy just to hear all the information and the history that you bring to the point. Because people can say this, and like we hear this in the red pill community all the time. They point out problems, but they don't really go into the history and the deep dive and like build that foundation for like, this is why we're here. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, I really appreciate, just to dovetail off what Joe said, those personal experiences are the sell. No one's talking about those personal experiences where you're at the brink of like a divorce with your husband. You're like, you know what? Let me just try this. It might just be his craziest thing ever, but it is what the Bible says. And I do have a God-fearing man that's trying to do good things in the world. So what if I just do this? And people need to hear those stories for the sell, because the sell is just in the church. It's a feminized, absolutely horrifying, happy wife, happy life.
I know.
Thing that you see these emasculated guys who've been castrated, and they're walking around with these pinned up smiles, and inside they're just dead, and they're overweight and they're unhappy, and their wives are unhappy too.
That's women you don't want that. Women think they want that. You don't want that. Like, you think you want your husband to give you everything you want. You actually don't. And it's like, if you can learn the dynamic as it was meant to be, it's so much better. And it's one of those things that's like, I wish I could just download it into women's brains so they could experience it for themselves and they would believe me, because I remember myself being younger and going through that phase where I was like, what if I just radically submit for a month? What if just for a month I just radically submit and just serve my husband, like abandon all the resistance and all the like feeling like I got to fight him on stuff. And like, because women, we all have this, and it's just so socially programmed into us that we're supposed, you see it all the time, don't you guys? Do you ever see with like friends and people where it's like the woman feels like she has to oppose him for the sake of opposing him on stuff? It could be something so tiny, something so small and stupid, like, well, he wants to spend money on this thing that I think is dumb and it's only $100, but like if I give in on that, then he's just gonna run wild and do whatever. It's like we really have been sold this lie that we have to like fight for dominance with our husband, that we have to like be in this constant perpetual struggle, and that like we have to overcome him and subdue him and tame him. But then once you get that, what do women do?
Leave him.
Oftentimes they cheat. They oftentimes cheat or leave, because it's like, well, now you're just a wet noodle. Now you're just like a woman. You're just submitting to me, and I don't really want to be in charge. I don't really want to have everything on my plate. And you'll hear women say, I don't want to be his mother. Okay, if you don't want to be his mother, then stop telling him what to do. It's like, you can't have both. Let him be the man, let him be the head, let him be the leader, let him have that responsibility. And you'll actually also find that it's really nice not to feel like you have to be the boss all the time. It's really a relief when you find, oh, I can trust him. He is going to pay the mortgage. Like he's going to, maybe not everything will be done exactly how I would do it, but everything's going to be fine. And he'll make sure that his family is taken care of. Again, it might not be how you would do it, but he's going to do what he's supposed to do if you let him. And if you say, you know what, I trust you, you've got this, he will. And not only will he rise to that occasion, he'll probably like blow away your expectations. I know that's what happened with my husband. I was like, all I ever had to do was let this man be the man, and look at him now. Like, he's amazing. I not only do I trust him, but it's like, I don't know what would happen to me without him now, because he's just this pillar of strength and calm in the storm for me when
That's
my
right.
emotions
That's
are
what a good man
crazy.
is right there.
Yeah, he is. If I'm ever not sure, like if I'm nervous, I'm scared, I don't know what to do, or like, oh, I don't know what decision to make, I immediately go to him, because he's like my
Shout out to
true
Andrew.
north.
Yeah.
Yes, he's my true north. He's my pillar. He's my strength. And he's just, but he learned to be that
Oh yeah,
when
I'm glad you're bringing that
I
up.
learned
He's
to
not
be the
born
wife.
that way. Yeah. I think
Right.
I've been married for 5 years, covenantally married. And I was really lucky because I found a woman that was both absolutely gorgeous but had a very, very good idea of value in herself. And she never submitted to her friends in the way, like even early on, like, with the promiscuous, they called her a prude. All these
Yeah.
different things that she was strong enough to be able to say to herself, and only to herself at that time, because she didn't have family. She was like with the
Yeah.
didn't have that core things, but something inside of her said, no, not a good exchange.
Yeah.
And, we're not perfect and we struggle in our relationship, of course, trying to find out and discover what God has as a good representation of marriage. And it is like you said, but it's the commitment and knowing his word is true, because the
Yeah.
both of us are going to use that as the way to find out our way through the clouds. And that is what we've discovered. The more we get to know each other, she knows that she's more prone to, obviously you can take the scientific explanation of the ups and downs of her endocrine system, and I'm more
Yeah.
rooted, but I don't have to get explosive in arguments, say, I can be the anchor, and she likes that, and she's
Yeah.
discovering she likes that because it helps the relationship move forward. And you learn that in marriage, and it's something to sharpen us both. And I think that after these 5 years has went by, it's just like looking so much forward to the future and what it has to add to you as individuals. It is sort of that acquisitional idea of like, I am going to be better because of this person. And
Yeah.
it feels kind of selfish at some point until you realize they're enjoying it as much as you are. And you're
Yeah.
like, glory to God for this. And it's those little stories that you can share with somebody
Yeah.
who doesn't know what it's like, who's just in a relationship where it's tit for tat, tit for tat. The idea of getting someone's attention is bugging them because they don't know a healthy way to get
Yeah.
attention. Or the male is afraid of having closeness with his woman, so he completely sabotages it all the time because he's finding out problems that she has, when it's like, yeah, she has problems. You're never going to find a perfect
Yeah.
woman. And it's
Right.
all these versions of excuse the world will sell you that makes you have distance. And
Yep.
so I love that, because he wasn't born it. Your husband wasn't a perfect husband in the
Yeah,
beginning.
and I want to say something about this sexual thing too. I think along with this, like, men just want this like bombshell of a woman. Like, it's very physical. Like, they think that this woman needs to look this way, and they're less concerned with who they are as a person nowadays. And that whole sexuality thing has made women turn more towards using their sexual power, which is extremely powerful. But it's also
Yeah.
men, like you said, the higher value men, they need to start to recognize like what a great woman is. But it's tough for them because if they're secular, especially, like, well, I can get as many of these women as I want whenever I want them. So I
Yeah.
don't really need a one good woman. I can go through all these, airheads and I'll be fine. So it's a
So
tough
we've met guys like that.
conundrum.
Like, we have a friend at the gym. His name, I'll leave his name out, but he's open about it, so it's not embarrassing. I could tell you his name. He's really open about it. But he's a silver fox. He's older. He's like, is he in his 60s or late 50s?
Yeah, 63.
63. The guy looks like a complete stud, and he has a big house. He had a reasonable career, made a ton of money, and he's honest with us. He's like, I'm lonely. All those girls, like Joe was saying, women that he was able to run through, notches on his belt, it just doesn't amount to anything. And at that age, he's he's at least kind enough to tell the younger guys that he's like, I'm stuck here. This is what I chose.
Yeah.
And it sucks and it's lonely and he'll never experience the intimacy, the equity in the relationship that you and your husband have worked and earned. To have someone close to you like that. I mean, it
Yeah.
really helps you to understand loneliness, you know, and how that is, again, what Satan wants is to isolate people so much that they, you know, unlive themselves or however you want to put it.
Yeah.
And that's the
Yeah, I
ultimate
think
goal here.
one more thing I'll say, so I don't take up your whole entire night, but we have forgotten that marriage is a sacrament of the church. It is there, especially like if you read through what the Orthodox marriage, we don't have vows. We actually just have a ceremony that's like an ancient ceremony where the priest reads stuff and it's like it's very ceremonial and there's crowns and everything. And we are consecrating the people to each other. They're dying to themselves. And your purpose in life is now to get your spouse to heaven. Your purpose now is to help your spouse in their salvation and die to yourself. And that also aids you in your salvation, right? So it's like a completely foreign concept to most Americans who think of marriage as like this legal agreement where we're like roommates with benefits and maybe we'll raise some kids together, and we divvy up house chores and we divvy up finances. That's not marriage. That's some other crap. That's some like you have a rental agreement with your roommate. That's what you have. A real marriage is supposed to be a sacrament, a holy sacrament where your goals are to get each other into the kingdom. You are supposed to be the primary person helping your spouse make it to the kingdom. So if we could think of it that way, I think that would go a long way to getting both sides where they need to be.
Heck
You
yeah,
know?
I couldn't agree more. And Joe and I, like, we respect the orth. We've been not toying, but I don't know what's going on. Some spiritual things been going on with that whole thing. The Orthodox tradition, the church fathers, and but we talk about this on the podcast a lot. We say to our listeners, who I'm pretty sure are mainly Protestant, is like, we need to take back our sacred nomenclature, you know, and marriage being a sacrament
Yeah.
is top of the list, you know, and
Yeah.
and the list goes down with grace, forgiveness, all of these things. They're concepts that inform an idea that actually give life, and you can't separate the two. They're not a choice. They're not whether or not they're
Right.
they're sacred sacred words that give
Yeah.
life. And so I like that a lot because it's actually super romantic if you're a believer
Yeah.
to think about that. I mean, sure, all that nice sort of whatever the things that they do nowadays sounds nice, but
Yeah.
the most romantic thing is like live or die together. Like that's it.
Yes.
Getting into the
Yeah.
eternal kingdom together. Like that's
Right.
awesome.
Yeah, that's like how we think of it. Like you guys said, I am a little bit of a metalhead and I lift weights and stuff. So in a lot of ways, I'm a very tomboyish girl. I'm not like the most feminine. So I always think it's really ironic that I'm the lady up here talking about this. Is a little weird in that way, but um me being hyper rational and more boyish in a lot of ways, it is nice to be able to embrace my femininity through motherhood. And I always say, if I had been born 40 years later, I'd probably be one of those girls who thinks she's a boy, especially having like a Marxist feminist mom. I probably would have been convinced that I was a boy as a teenager, and I would have never known how much I love being a mom, you know? So it's like the gift of being a mother, I want more women to embrace that. I don't want them all to reject it as this ball and chain and this like prison, this thing that holds, like I said, holds you back from what? Your Instagram modeling career? Like, come on now. Think about it for more than 2 seconds. But it's a wonderful thing that makes you have to grow into a much better, deeper person. So
Amen.
yeah, I
to
could probably
that.
go on all night, so I'll just be quiet now.
I love that.
Awesome.
I
Yeah,
love that. That
Where-
definitely ministered to me, and thank you, sister.
Me too.
Yeah.
Where can the audience find you?
I do have a little YouTube channel, which I will be doing more YouTube content after the holidays. Holidays are super busy, and I was working on this academic project for the church for a while. I got that done now. So hopefully starting January, I'll be doing more YouTube. That's just Rachel Wilson on YouTube. Just search me and I'll pop up. On Twitter, I am at Rach, the number 4 patriarchy. So Rach for patriarchy. I'm also on Instagram, but definitely check out my Substack, rwilson.substack.com. There's a lot of good stuff on there that doesn't make it into books. And then you can find my book, Occult Feminism, on Amazon.
So cool. You have been, like I said, you ministered to my soul greatly with not only I particularly enjoyed the stuff at the end, being married. That was really great.
Do we need to celebrate beautiful marriages more?
Yes,
it's
so
like,
like Joe
especially
said,
the red pill community is just like doom and gloom.
Like Joe said, it's the cell. It's the cell that's missing. You know, we
Yeah.
need more of it. And maybe you'll write a book about that. Who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe that'll
My
be good.
97-year-old grandma keeps telling me that that's what I need to do, so maybe I should listen. She's amazing, by the way. I did a video with her on my YouTube. So if you want to hear what things were like for her growing up in the 30s and 40s and how different it was, go check out that video.
No kidding. That's
she's
awesome.
amazing. I love her. Wouldn't be who I am without her. So.
Oh man, you're lucky to have one of those sticking around like that.
I
That's
am.
a blessing right there. That is
super
awesome.
lucky.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone. We'll throw those links in the description, and we'll probably see you next week.
Yeah, love you.
And Rachel, you can stay on after.
Okay.